The encounter. When humanity first left the cradle of their home solar system and encountered the galactic community, they presented an exceptionally curated image of themselves as a curious, peaceful, and enlightened race. Of course, almost none of the galactic community bought it for a second. This skepticism was because, even when exploring a galaxy that was, as far as they knew, empty of other intelligent species, every single one of their ships, from the Ark-class colony ships to their scientific vessels, was armed with enough weapons to take on a standard galactic dreadnought. What kind of peaceful race puts nuclear and antimatter missiles capable of hitting a shuttle half a solar system away on scientific and diplomatic vessels, or have self-destruct mechanisms built into every ship that will overload their cores and wipe the ship from the universe down to the last atom, and even the parts reaching into subspace? It seemed like humanity had come to the stars ready for war. The galactic community had seen species similar to this in the past. Species that showed up on the galactic stage armed as such were always brash and cocky, bent on conquest and domination. Many thought this would be another species that would have to be taught a lesson and put in their place. However, humanity's entry into the galactic community was peaceful. They were curious about anything. They had not lied about that. They were among the most curious species the other races had ever seen. They gobbled up and integrated new technology at an astounding rate. They integrated culture, science, and art equally quickly. They were a species that was highly individualistic. The variances among them were sometimes greater than those between other galactic races, making many wonder how they were able to remain a cohesive empire. But the one thing that was the most interesting and terrifying about them was that they seemed to be able to turn each new piece of technology they got from the galactic community into a weapon. The Wall. Humanity spent the first 50 years after learning about the vast amount of intelligent life in the galaxy fortifying their home system and colonizing a few others. The humans built what can only be described as a wall around their home system, a defense network of millions of small stations placed strategically around the Sol system. This was not new. The Galactics had seen species do this before. These species always became isolationist. They would fortify the systems they held and cut off all trade and contact with the galactic community. Humanity, however, surprised them again. The humans continued to trade openly and freely, and their home system became a massive trade hub, with millions of ships passing through the system. It seemed all would be quiet and peaceful, and the humans were becoming just another species in the massive galactic community. The Galactics who had studied their history knew their bloody and violent past, but they hadn't shown anything but peace and respect toward the rest of the races. The first incident that should have worried the galactic community didn't happen until about 75 years after humanity had joined the Galactic Federation. At the time, it had seemed a small thing, but many races should have taken it as a warning. Do not mess with humanity. Humanity's ability to integrate technology was nothing short of astounding to the other galactic species. Within 5 years of meeting the other races and being taught subspace theory and how to achieve FTL travel, humanity had not only built their own warp drives and outfitted them to their ships, they had improved upon the millennial design that thousands of species had used from time beyond memory. They were achieving greater efficiency and increasing their speed by nearly double. This technology, humanity shared freely with the other races, and it became their primary trade good. It raised them high within the galactic economy at an astounding rate. The Galactic Shift. Humanity manufactured these drives in 3 different systems, and the human FTL drive became the standard throughout the galaxy. And the humans weren't done. They didn't just keep making the same drive and selling it for thousands of years. Every year, the design changed and improved. It literally changed the galaxy. Systems too far out to be economically significant were now just a standard FTL jump away. Systems whose primary existence was to be a way stop along trade routes to refuel were no longer critical. The entire trade infrastructure of the galaxy shifted at a rate never seen before. Of course, the Praeon, A biotic race who had left their biological forms behind long ago were understandably upset. They had been the #1 provider of FTL drives for as long as any sentient could remember. It was the core of their economy, the thing that allowed them to be held in such high regard by the rest of the galactic community. They were confounded by the fact that a group of biological beings had out-innovated what was considered the most intelligent race in the galaxy. Their computer brains were capable of computation unmatched by any other race, biological or synthetic. The humans, who always seemed to be trying to avoid upsetting other races, made a deal with the Pran. They set up a trade agreement. Humanity would get vast amounts of exotic materials that were abundant in many Pran systems, and in trade, humanity would share the plans for the FTL drives, even sending them the updated designs every few years. This allowed both the Pran and humanity to make and distribute FTL drives across the galaxy. It didn't ease the blow to the Pran pride, but it allowed their economy to remain stable and for them to keep their place in the galaxy. Technological titans. Humanity made and shared advancements in almost every other technology as well. Improvements for terraforming, mining, medicine, and communication. All of this they shared with anyone willing to pay or make a trade deal. Humanity became one of the top R&D civilizations in the galaxy, and they didn't shy away from learning from any species they could, always finding innovative ways to use every technology they came across. The one branch of technology humanity guarded closely and almost never shared was their advances in weaponry. They would occasionally sell weapons and armor for soldiers, and sometimes new defensive technology, shields and orbital bombardment protections, and very rarely an improved design for existing ship weaponry. Of course, spies from various species and even the Galactic Council kept an eye on humanity's military like they did every other species, but nothing seemed too alarming. This wasn't uncommon for species. Although most of the galaxy was at peace, war was always happening somewhere, so no one gave the humans too much of a thought. They seemed to be the golden goose that kept on giving. Why look too closely at a peaceful race? 76 years after humanity joined the galaxy at large, the rest of the species learned a crucial lesson. Do not mess with humanity. The first skirmish. Vice Admiral Galen Hanos sat on the bridge of the TSF Golden Light, one of the newest dreadnoughts in the Terran Federation fleet. Galen was 54 years old, with hair that had gone gray. Luckily, with the advances in medicine, he hadn't gone bald like his father had. He could have had the color of his hair corrected as many other officers did, but he liked to think the gray hair gave him an air of age and wisdom. He hardly looked his 54 otherwise. The anti-aging drugs humanity had engineered from the designs of other species meant that his face was relatively unlined. Age was a hard thing to tell these days. One could practically look 25 their entire lifespan, which at this point was expected to be 160 years, and increasing every day. Life in the Terran fleet was relatively boring, especially in the core systems. Out in the fringes of human space, on the newly budding colonies, there was a chance you might see some combat, but even then it was mostly escort or patrol missions. The galaxy was surprisingly peaceful in most places, and humanity's status as a major tech exporter meant not too many species wanted to anger them and face an embargo or higher prices. There were only a few other officers on the bridge. I could run almost everything on a ship. The only people needed were those who had to make decisions, navigate, or fire weapons. That last had been a standard rule since before humanity joined the Federation. I was not allowed to fire weapons. It could aim and target, but a human had to authorize it and push the big red button, so to speak. The fleet was mobilized today because there was an important visitor. A diplomat from the GCKS, along with their escort of 70 ships, was visiting the Sol system for a trade deal or another. He didn't follow all the details. The GCKS, a bipedal reptilian race with 4 arms and a tail, were a small and rather unimportant civilization. However, they had access to some resource or another that the science types needed for whatever new galactic product they were cooking up. 70 ships were a large group for one diplomat, but one of the universal truths seemed to be that bureaucrats of any species were inefficient and always needed far too many resources to do a simple job. And this was one of those grand formal deals with ceremony and pomp. The unexpected crisis. There were, however, millions of ships in the system at the moment, both human and from hundreds of other races, trading and visiting the Sol system. Galen was glad he had gone into the fleet. He rarely had to deal with the strange other races, other than the occasional ship off its course whose pilot needed a gentle reminder to not go where they didn't have permission. The ceremony was over. The vice admiral had attended. It was grand, overblown, and boring. Now he was just giving these lizards an escort out of the system. Not that he expected any trouble from them, but a Terran dreadnought escort showed they honored the GCK and would prevent any trouble if they had bad relationships with other species in the system. Humanity enforced a very strict neutrality policy within its borders. No fighting of any kind would happen in the Sol system or the dozens of others controlled by humanity. Rarely had that rule needed to be enforced, only a few times to show the aliens that humanity was serious, and everyone had fallen in line. They had just passed Jupiter on sublight engines. No FTL travel was allowed any closer within the system. In fact, it wasn't even possible. Humanity had blanketed the area with millions of FTL jammers that prevented FTL travel in the inner system. Well, unless you were on a Terran ship that had override codes to disable the jammers. It amazed Galen that most other species had not done this. What kind of idiots were the rest of the species in the galaxy to allow ships to just FTL right into the heart of your system? Most had not even developed the technology. After humanity had cracked FTL with the help of the Federation, setting up the anti-FTL grid had been the first project. There was just too much risk of a fleet being able to jump in and bombard the homeworld. That's how Galen would do it if he were going to attack a system. FTL in. Shoot a couple thousand nukes and antimatter bombs, and FTL back out through subspace. The revelation. It was one of the first things they taught to every captain in the Fleet Academy. Humanity had licensed and sold the FTL jamming technology to many species, but it was rare that they used it. It slowed down trade, adding a 12-hour journey on sublight engines, and it was expensive, very expensive. Humanity had no problem affording it. Most species opted not to install an FTL jamming system around their planets, often just around small moons or strategic space stations. Galen thought they were all idiots. A couple of Terran dreadnoughts could destroy all but the most well-defended worlds of many of its neighbors in a few hours. Not that humanity let anyone know that. Directive 1 was to keep humanity's military capabilities as secret as possible and its advanced weapons technology out of the hands of alien races, lest it be turned back on them. Galen had a very high-level security clearance. He knew that even most commanders didn't know half of the Terran fleet's capability. He doubted that even he knew everything. Humanity was cautious. Outnumbered trillions to one on a galactic scale, many of the other species didn't see it. But Galen did. It would only take one war, a war that he and many other humans thought was inevitable, if far off, for hundreds of species to disappear into the void. When that war eventually came, humanity was going to be prepared. This galactic peace could not last forever. Galen expected another hour or so of boring sublight flight, a quick vid call with the delegate to thank him for his visit, and to make all the formal goodbyes. And then he'd be headed back toward Earth via a quick FTL trip. He had done hundreds of these escort missions over the years. Instead, the subspace call he received on the view screen was not from the delegate. The crisis unfolds. Instead, the subspace call he received on the view screen was not from the delegate. Vice Admiral, said his communications officer, Priority 1 call incoming from Central Command. Admiral Z himself. Main screen, he said, setting down his tablet and the coffee he had been sipping, and sitting up straight. Central wouldn't call without a serious reason, and the Admiral himself meant it was very important indeed. Galen knew this and prepared himself. Admiral Z's image appeared on the screen, still in his formal dress, even though it had been about 12 hours since they had left Earth and the formal meeting with the delegate. Galen knew he was actually around 70, but he looked to be 30 at most. His black hair and perfect agent features kept youthful with a stronger anti-aging treatment than his own. Galen knew him to be a vain man, but he also knew he hadn't gotten to where he was without being damned good at his job. Vice Admiral Hannes, we have a problem. I need you to detain that delegate and his escort immediately. Galen didn't hesitate. He snapped his fingers and pointed at his defense officer, who was responsible for handling all the ship's defensive measures. Activate FTL jammers now, the captain said immediately, entering some commands at his station. Done, she said before turning her eyes back to the admiral. Lock onto all ships and have me a firing solution ASAP, Galen said to his weapons officer. Charleston, be ready to hail the delegate when I am finished with this call. See who else we have in the area. The admiral waited while Galen gave the orders. Everything had been done before he was done speaking. Although the fleet rarely saw action, they were kept sharp and ready with rigorous training. What's the problem, sir? Galen asked. One of our high-level researchers is missing. We tracked them, and they disappeared from our grid at the same time the escort fleet left orbit. We backtracked, and it seems 2 shuttles that were visiting the research center were able to spoof our system, suppress alarms, and kidnap the researcher. A prototype for a new classified weapon system is also missing. There was significant damage to a research outpost and 10 casualties. It took Galen a moment to process this. How in the hell did the lizards do all that without triggering any systems? How were they able to do that, sir? Unknown. We have teams on it as I speak. What are your orders, sir? Galen asked, but he knew the answer. Directive 1. You have full command to make any decision you deem necessary. Retrieve or neutralize both the technology and the researcher. Yes, sir. I'll leave it to you. The Vice Admiral cut the call. For Galen, it was a bit mind-boggling to think the GCK, a race that was nowhere near the top of the technological ladder, had managed to get past all of Earth's security, steal a researcher and a weapon prototype, and prevent anyone from finding it for nearly 12 hours. Something else had to be going on here. But that was the job of other people to figure out. Galen's job was to prevent this delegation from leaving the system. Directive 1 had to be upheld at all costs. Sergeant Gilchrist, our boarding teams mobilized. Ready and waiting, the commander of the Void Walkers, the Special Forces branch of the Terran fleet who were trained to board enemy ships, said. Someone had already put out the ship-wide command to alert everyone to prepare for combat. Galen had to smile. He had a hell of a crew. He barely had to command them. Now it's time to let the GCK thieves know the jig is up, he said. Lieutenant Edith, he said to his young-looking communications officer, get me the lizard who thinks he can steal from the Terrans. A moment later, the face of the bright yellow, 4-armed lizard-like alien with slitted green eyes stared back at Galen from the display. 2 of its arms twitched nervously, its hands closing and opening. Galen was sure that if his species could sweat, it would be pouring buckets down its face. He wasn't an expert in xenobiology or body language, but he could feel the nervousness. It held its other 2 arms clasped together, thin arms ending in clawed, scaly hands that were clasped together. The GCK made some guttural, roaring noises that were its species' method of communication, noticeably quieter than those Galen had heard from it earlier. The translator kicked in, muting most of the sound and translating the sounds into Earth standard with a short delay. Is there a problem, most esteemed Admiral? We were preparing to jump and noticed we were unable to. There seems to be a subspace disturbance in the area. Galen smiled, a human smile, which terrified most other aliens. Showing teeth was usually a sign of aggression, especially among the rare predatory species among the sentients. And humans are, at their core, predators. All the other species know this, especially because humans are significantly larger than most other races. Even more so with the older races, the more advanced they became, the less need they had for larger body mass or physical strength. They relied on technology for everything, resulting in smaller and physically weaker species after millions of generations. The GCK would have barely come up to Galen's chest, and its limbs were thin. To most other species, the GCK were terrifying, with long claws and sharp rows of teeth in a feline-like mouth. However, they had been a space-faring race for nearly 1,000,000 years, and whatever powerful predator they had been in the past, they were but a shadow of it now. To humans, GCKs were like tiny, thin lizard men. Galen researched the combat capabilities of any race he was to escort. He had rarely needed that knowledge, but Galen Hanos was a thorough man. He knew that an unarmored human could break every bone in a GCK's body with but a few kicks and punches. They had claws and speed, but no mass to throw around. If his men needed to board those ships, it wouldn't be much of a fight. The GCK knew it too. So Galen stood, bringing himself to his full height, a respectable 5'10", not so large for a human, but practically a giant before the GCK. He saw the GCK flinch, and he widened his grin. "Your ships are locked in an anti-FTL field my ship is generating. You aren't going anywhere. You stole something from us, and that is something we do not allow. We will be boarding your ships." The delegate reared its head back and hunched up its shoulders, the claws of its lower arms tightening into its approximation of a fist. "How? We are 20,000 kilometers ahead of you. We are past your system's anti-FTL field. No ship can generate a field that large. This is a trick." The GCK made a gesture to someone off-screen and spoke while blocking his communicator. Galen had wondered why the GCKs had gotten so far ahead of his ship, but he hadn't worried about it at the time. Plus, his ship could generate a field up to 50,000 kilometers. The ships of other species could rarely go past 10. He could extend his field further by deploying drones carrying more FTL jammers, and there were a few more tricks up the Terran Federation's sleeve to jam out further. But those were kept as a last resort. Only people with his security clearance and above were aware of those. "No trick. Now my shuttles will be boarding your ships. Your ships will be impounded, and you and your crew will be taken into custody. This is a flagrant violation of our agreement, and you are well aware of the fallout this incident will have on your relationship with the Terran Federation. Make this peaceful, and your bureaucrats and ours can do their thing." "Sir, they're running. Accelerating to escape our jamming field," the defense officer said. The communications officer had muted the GCK, so he couldn't hear the conversation. "Accelerate to close the distance, but keep it within GKS," Galen said. GKS stood for Galactic Gnome Standard. Galactic Gnome Standard was the set of self-imposed limitations humanity had imposed on its warships, the image they presented to the galaxy of their capabilities. Within GKS, a human warship was still capable of around 5% greater speed than most other species, showing that humanity had an edge, that their tech was impressive, but it hid the majority of humanity's capabilities. The TSF Golden Light was capable of way beyond that number, but showing more than that was dangerously close to violating Directive 1. "You can't outrun us or outgun us." Galen searched for his name before looking at the communications officer. What's the human equivalent of his name? Disharmony Claw. Galen had to almost chuckle at the name. Probably sounded less idiotic in the alien native tongue. Disharmony. It's time to stand down. The lizard let out a roar that didn't translate. It must have been anger or frustration. "I have 70 war-capable ships. We are taking this weapon and your researcher and leaving. You humans lie. Your technology over us with this new weapon, we can expand our empire and crush our competition and rise to our rightful place in the galaxy. We offered to pay, to give you anything you wanted for, but one of your weapons." His words were feverish, the translation AI doing a good job of conveying it too, Galen noted. "They're firing, sir. All 70 ships. Nuclear warheads and antimatter torpedoes along with gravitation beams, the defense officer stated. They had closed the distance within weapons range of the GCK weapons. Galen smiled wider. For once, real combat. It was time to show the GCK a lesson. Too bad he had to stay within GK's abilities, though. Without that restriction, he could wipe out this fleet in a matter of seconds. Hannity, grab beams to take out the missiles. I'm assuming our shields can take their grav beams. Yes, sir. We will have to go to 5% above GKist to avoid damage to the ship. Galen thought about it. 5% wasn't much, and he could get away with that. No point in taking damage on the new dreadnought. It was the newest model. 5% of GKS wouldn't raise any red flags. Do it, Chew. I want you to take out around 30 of those ships. Don't hit the flagship. I'd like to try and get our researcher back alive. Yes, sir. A few moments later, the TSF Golden Lights grav beams fired. Precise weapons that targeted each missile with an intense gravitational field. With pinpoint accuracy, hundreds of emitters fired from all over the ship, targeting solutions hitting missiles 10,000 kilometers away. When they hit, each missile created a gravitational field in space about a foot around, stopping the missile in its tracks and pulling each one into a tiny little ball, folding in on itself. The antimatter missiles exploded, of course, harmlessly far from the ship. The nuclear devices were disabled, the chain reaction required to make them explode destroyed. A moment later, their grav beams hit the golden light, but with its shield at 5% over GKS, they didn't get through. The Golden Light's own gravitational generator worked with the shield generator to counteract each gravity beam's impact. A moment later, the TSF Golden Light's own grav beams fired again. These ones set to create a wider field, and ships folded in on themselves toward whatever location was hit by the beam. They cut through the inferior shields like butter. The Golden Light's missiles came next, each one with a sub-AI slave to the main system, headed for the weakest part of each ship. Within 10 seconds, nearly half the enemy fleet was gone. Galen motioned to the communications officer again, and Disharmony Claw appeared on the view screen again. It's over, Disharmony. That was a warning. I could have taken out your entire fleet. Surrender. The GCK screamed, arms shaking and raking at the image of the captain in front of him. The lizard said something off-screen again. And a moment later, a woman was dragged in front of the view screen. The researcher, her hands tied, and 2 GCKs held her. It's not over, screamed Disharmony, his wide canine mouth showing all his long, sharp teeth. Let us go with the weapon, and I will return your researcher. Deny me, and I will kill her now. You will not be able to rescue her. Surely, given what she was working on, she is valuable to you. No. Galen looked at the woman, the smile falling from his face, anger replacing it. You don't know us very well. Galen's voice was cold and hard. What's your name, ma'am? He asked the researcher. Dr. Emily Marcellus. She was an elderly woman who looked to be around 65, which meant she either avoided anti-aging treatments or they were reaching the limit of their usefulness on her. She might have been around since before humanity joined the galactic community. Galen hadn't met her. He did not work closely with research types. I'm sorry, Emily, Galen said, pain in his voice. The woman smiled. I know. It's okay. Directive 1, she said, standing up straighter, eyes clear and hard, focusing on Galen's. Directive 1. Galen stood at attention and saluted the brave woman. And then the older woman, hands tied, body covered in bruises, tired and beaten, did violence in a way that only humans can. She went feral. She slammed her elbow back into one of the GCKs behind her. The crack could be heard over the transmission as the brittle bones of the GCK's face broke, its snout bending to one side and black blood pouring as bones and teeth were shattered like glass. She spun away, even elderly, still faster than the GCKs. She kicked out at the other, its legs shattering under the blow. She slammed her forehead into its own as it started to fall, and its skull caved in. She jumped toward Disharmony as he backed away frantically. Another guard jumped in her way, its claws slashing across her stomach, drawing a line of red. But the old woman let out a howl of rage and pain and charged into it. She landed on it as it fell, slamming her knees into its chest, which caved under her weight. Two more GCKs jumped on her, and she flailed her arms, sending one flying back as the other one's claws bit into her, trying to get a grip on her. It managed, finally pinning her arms at her sides. She bit into its neck, and the GCK howled in pain, pulling away. A chunk of flesh was ripped from its neck, and black blood sprayed over the woman, dousing her gray hair. She got up from her knees and charged at Disharmony. Galen thought she was going to kill him, but there was the crack of a blast, and a charred hole appeared in Dr. Emily Marcellus's stomach. Running on adrenaline and knowing it was her last moment, she kept charging at Disharmony. It took 4 more shots before the elderly woman slumped to her knees in front of the GCK leader, her still-bound hands reaching to grab him. Then the brave researcher lost her strength and fell. Disharmony Claw's eyes were wide, and his slitted pupils dilated until they were almost black. His lower arms twitched and trembled. "What kind of monsters are you?" he howled. "The kind you don't mess with," Galen said with a grim look. "Power down now, or 50 of my soldiers will board every one of your ships and take you by force." The lizard stood there in shock, body shaking, looking down at the doctor. One elderly human, beaten with hands tied, had killed at least 3 GCKs, maybe 4. "You monsters, you'll come for us. We have to protect ourselves," Disharmony said, seeming to gain some composure. The transmission ended. "They're running, sir. Full acceleration. We can catch them," Chu said. "Get me a firing solution," Galen ordered. "Sir, we have another problem," Lieutenant Edith, the communications officer, said. "I'm detecting incoming FTL signals. At least 150 individual signals. Looks like it matches GCK ship signatures. Coming in close 22 minutes, sir." "Damn. Is anyone else close?" 2 freighters, 28 minutes out, receiving reports of another 100 FTL signals on the other side of the system. "They're trying to draw our attention so they can get the stolen weapon out," Galen said. "Sir, we can get another dreadnought here in 5 minutes if we break GKS and let them hit FTL from near Sol." Galen didn't want to do that. That was too big a secret. Terran ships did jump inside the anti-FTL field, but only out past Mars. They'd kept it a secret that Terran ships could jump anywhere in the system. What was told to the galactic community was that they could do that because the field was weaker there. They didn't want everyone to know it wasn't a barrier to them at all. "With both of us here, can we take on all those ships and the incoming without breaking GKS?" "No, sir. Even with them here, we'll need to exceed shield by 30% GKS and weapons by 20%, said Chu. Galen thought hard. Decisions had to be made. Either they exposed that the anti-FTL shield could be bypassed and show them their ships were more powerful, or he would have to show everyone watching, the thousands of races in the system, a hint of the true power of a TSF dreadnought. Or they let the stolen technology go. It all depended on what had been stolen. He needed more information. Time to make a call. "Keep us on course. I want to be within 20 of them at all times. Get me the Admiral." Lieutenant Edith made the call, and Admiral Z answered immediately. "I've been monitoring the situation, Hanos. What do you need?" The Admiral asked, no second-guessing Galen's decisions or issuing his own orders, leaving it up to the man in the field to make the decision. Z was a damned good admiral. "I need to know what's on that ship. We either have to break GKS or let it go, and I need to make a decision now. More ships incoming. The GCKs want this thing badly."